Besides a few halfway decent video games, the life of a Terminator fan is one of unending disappointment. The first two Terminators are some of the best sci-fi blockbuster cinema ever made, using high-concept context to breathe new life into the classic movie monster formula of a big guy who's coming for you, and no matter what you do, he ain't gonna stop. Then, in the sequel, that big guy's on your side, but there's an even bigger guy now, and no matter what that first guy does, he's not gonna stop. Now that's how you escalate a fucking Hollywood franchise. However, without the wise guidance of James Cameron, the Hollywood moneymen who own that IP now just do not have the single slightest hint of an idea of what to do with it. So we've gotten sequel after soft reboot after ill-conceived prequel that don't really have any ideas either, outside of rehashing stuff that worked in those first two movies and slapping a thin coat of new Terminator lore on top for the nerds. But all that lore still centers on the big JC, John Connor, his immaculate time travel conception, and various skullduggery surrounding that one big evil company in Silicon Valley. You know the one. And while that Superman allegory stuff was okay for a couple movies, it kind of just makes the world that's ending feel smaller and more one-dimensional the more times they keep coming back to that well. So no, Skydance, I don't think that another new one with geriatric Arnie in it is gonna fix the problem, actually. Get some new fucking material, please. And hey, good news, they finally did. Sourced straight from Japan and the legendary cyborg violence artisans at Production IG, Terminator Zero is easily the best entry in the franchise since its first sequel, and not coincidentally, the only one where nobody says, "Come with me if you want to live," or "I'll be back at any point," at least in the English dub, which is the original script for the show. The Japanese version was done later, so if anybody does in that version, that is localizers with an agenda. Also, yes, it does feature a lavishly animated making of a Terminator sequence, though sadly, it is not accompanied by Kenji Kawai music. Michelle Bursky and Kevin Henthorne's OST is still pretty damn good. It's just no Kenji Kawai soundtrack, though few soundtracks are. The show itself is the brainchild of the Batman and Berserker creator Mattson Tomlin and Sanrio Boys director Masashi Kudo, telling a story both figuratively and literally about breaking free of that endless conceptual loop that Terminator's been stuck in since Mr. Cameron sailed off on his Titanic. Set in a retro-futuristic Tokyo circa 1997, specifically August 29th, which, if you know, you know, we're so many loops deep into the war with Skynet at this point that even the AI's lost count. John Connor even got God eventually in one of those loops, but that was really just the beginning, because new resistance leaders simply rose up to take his place time and again. Obviously, because that's how guerrilla armies tend to work. With so many time travelers coming and going, though, broader parts of the world have become increasingly aware of the impending spooky, scary skeleton robot threat and begun working toward their own solutions to the whole apocalypse problem that don't involve anyone in California for once. In Tokyo, for instance, Dr. Malcolm Lee is developing his own super powerful AI to rival Skynet named Kokoro, who he hopes might one day save humanity from our fated doom. Only problem is, it's pretty much Judgment Day, and he's still not sure if she'll actually want to save us after she comes online. Kokoro's been granted free will, you see, since, you know, obviously everything they tried to shackle Skynet's intelligence over at Cyberdyne didn't actually work and only ended up making the murder robots matter. So with the clock ticking a minute from midnight, Malcolm is left scrambling to concoct just one compelling enough philosophical, ethical, or even emotional argument to convince his creation that mankind deserves salvation. Whether Malcolm's plan is fated to fail or War succeed, though, the existence of a second electronic superintelligence poses a pretty obvious threat to Skynet's ambitions, so Skynet does what Skynet always does and sends a big scary metal guy back in time to get him. But of course, the Resistance catches wind of that plan and does what the Resistance always does, sending their scrappiest wasteland warrior back behind the Terminator to get him before he gets the other guy. That warrior's name is Eiko, but I like to call her Mommy, and I would also like to personally thank the animators at Production IG for drawing her naked so good. Also, while we're saying thanks very much for how good you guys drew all the brutal violence when the other Terminator finds her family right before her time jump, and all the other brutal violence all over this whole anime. It is rare nowadays to see animated blood and gore with this much of a visceral impact, and between that and the well-sculpted, well-animated butts, it really feels like the studio going back to its pulpy, straight-to-video roots, which I cannot think of a more perfect aesthetic fit for a Terminator anime, especially one that focuses on that classic fleshy T-800 model over the sleek CGI shape-shifting of the T-1000. Of course, since he is running a Terminator prevention research lab, Doc Malcolm naturally has some pretty substantial anti-Terminator security set up, including a massive EMP weapon that doubles as a shut-off switch for Kokoro, so the Metal Monster's mission isn't quite as simple as just walking through the front door, guns blazing, especially since he's not in America, where blazing guns can be conveniently acquired within a few blocks of basically any target you might want to hit. But Malcolm just happens to have 3 kids, Kenta, Reika, and Hiro, who just happen to be conveniently located in buildings much more susceptible to the old "I'll be back," so a pretty obvious path around that security presents itself to the Terminator, and while they and the family housekeeper Misaki are lucky enough to be out of the apartment when he comes knocking, chasing after Reika, who ran away with a robot cat that Kenta wanted to take apart to see how it works. You know how it is with Terminators. It's not a matter of if they'll catch up to you, but when and where and how much collateral damage. Questions which this anime is thankfully quite eager to find some very exciting answers to, playing hits like the classic police station raid and highway chase scene alongside some delightfully tense and novel horror sequences in the dark, dilapidated shopping arcades of old Tokyo. Plus, well, half the fun is not knowing where the killer robot's gonna show up next, right? But you get it. They got some real nice backdrops for equally nice action scenes that walk a very fine line between paying homage to the series' past and blazing forward along a bold new path. One fascinating feature of that new path is the addition of Enos to the Terminator universe, an obvious riff on the Asimo robots created by Honda's engineers at the turn of the millennium, though these actually make good on the promise of that project as helpful, friendly, automated assistants who can stock shelves, walk dogs, and take over all the other menial labor that mankind's so loath to do, something that was only recently fully realized, as clearly was the promise of Sony's somewhat disappointing robot dog Aibo through the Koneko toy that inadvertently gives the kids their head start on that Terminator. And the anime actually does a pretty good job of exploring some of the more subtle ways these new advancements in automation are changing society. We got protesters at the robot plant, store owners abusing their new, effectively, slaves in ways they'd never treat a human worker. Really interesting world-building nuggets sprinkled all over the place that make me want to see more of this alt-historical sci-fi vision of Japan before everything goes down. But what with it being August 29th and all, there obviously isn't too much time left to dive into that before Chekhov's iRobot army gets picked up off the table and put to work. And when it does, let's just say the Enos more than live up to the chilling animated violence wrought by the show's other, more iconic killer robot. And also to the very impressive Rise of the Machines scene in Vivi Fluoride Eye's song, which, if you haven't seen it, is basically what if Hatsune Miku was a Terminator who got sent back to save humanity instead. And any and all Terminator enjoyers out there will probably enjoy that anime a lot too, but I digress. I can see some Terminator fans potentially complaining that the move to a more cliched robot uprising scenario, as opposed to the original version of Judgment Day where the whole Earth is bathed in nuclear hellfire, is just too much of a departure from the brand's identity. But whenever they do depict premonitions of that original Judgment Day, the animators at IG show they're more than capable of making that kind of Armageddon every bit as horrifying as the iconic playground scene, if not more so. And I don't know, man. The Enos are just fucking cool. They perfectly capture that clean, rounded, plastic aesthetic that defined Japanese futurism at the turn of the millennium, like your PS1 grew legs and decided to murder you one day. And while there's definitely something uncanny about them from the jump, they managed to become properly menacing after sustaining a bit of battle damage and exposing the skeletal frame underneath their smooth white shells. They make a real neat addition to the Terminator universe and complement what makes the T-800 so terrifying beautifully. I don't want to mislead you by gushing so much about all the brutal action and cool robots, though, because Terminator Zero also has some fascinating philosophical points about human nature, fate versus free will, and a lot of other juicy topics that fire over your head like that meme Gundam. The time it spends focused on a very smart guy locked in a room with an even smarter toaster as he tries to make the case for not toasting humanity is not wasted in the slightest, and the holographic display conveniently built into that room facilitates some visually stunning imagery to accompany all that dry philosophizing. Malcolm's conversation with Kokoro is every bit as exciting and dramatic as all the shootouts and car chases the show has to offer. Well, maybe not quite as exciting. There are some pretty damn good shootouts and car chases in this thing, but as far as conversations go, it's as fascinating as it gets. Fascinating enough that it never feels like a drag, even as it's dragged out across all 8 episodes, framing all the show's action as a reflection in some way or another of that core conflict over whether or not mankind even deserves to be saved, and whether our fate is set in stone or something that we create for ourselves. And I won't tell you what answer it reaches exactly, but I will say that it does set things up very effectively for a continuation of this new and exciting Terminator timeline. 6 full seasons of continuation, if Tomlin has his way and Netflix doesn't Netflix it, while still ending on a satisfying enough note that even if it does get Netflixed, I mean, it won't feel complete. The ending is a hell of a cliffhanger, but every character has an arc at least, which is more than we can say for most Terminator sequels. Still, there is clearly a lot of story left to tell, and I'd really like to see them get to tell the rest of it, which you can help make happen right now by watching the show at your earliest convenience and telling all your friends about it too. And, of course, by leaving a comment, a like, all that stuff that helps a video get algorithmed to help this video get algorithmed and tell more people how good the show is. It's not quite a perfect anime. The English script is peppered with altogether too many out-of-nowhere f***s for its own good. There are a few points where the otherwise smart kids just act kind of stupid to get the story where it needs to go, though mostly before they're in real obvious danger, thankfully. And the Terminator's final gambit is just plain dumb, but it manages to stay true to the original films while doing its own very cool thing and opening up a much wider world of possibilities for the future of the franchise than it's really ever had before. And it does all of that while looking and feeling like the gritty 90s Terminator OVA that we never got. As both an otaku and a long-suffering Terminator fan, I really couldn't ask for more, though Again, I do really hope we get more, and you should get on watching it ASAP to maximize our chances. I'm Geoff Thew. I was actually sent back in time from a future where this series did get Netflixed, and you gotta trust me, guys, you do not want to live in that timeline. There's like 5 Big Mouth spin-offs.